It was a quiet Sunday morning when Ethan arrived at my place. I hadn't seen him in years. We grew up together, played soccer in the same muddy parks, shared sandwiches when our parents forgot to pack lunch. Now he stood taller, calmer, dressed in a dark blue tailored suit like he'd walked straight out of a city council meeting. The second he stepped out of his black SUV, I knew someone would have something to say. But I didn't think it would happen this fast. He was just grabbing something from the back seat when I saw the blinds twitch across the street. Karen. White hair, tightly cut short. Always wearing the same stretched white t-shirt. Always patrolling the sidewalk like she owned every blade of grass. She stared at Ethan like he didn't belong, like he was a problem waiting to happen. I waved at him from my porch. "Coffee's hot, man. Come on in," I said loud enough for her to hear. He smiled and started walking over, casual, relaxed. That's when Karen stormed out of her front door like it was a military drill. "Excuse me," she shouted, pointing with her finger, so stiff it looked like a weapon. Ethan turned, confused but polite. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. "You can start by telling me what you're doing in this neighborhood," she snapped. "We've had break-ins lately, and I've never seen you before." "I'm here visiting a friend," Ethan said calmly, nodding toward my house. "That your car?" she barked. "Yes, ma'am. Doesn't look like you live here." I stepped off the porch. "Karen, he's with me. He's my guest." She didn't even look at me. Her eyes were locked on Ethan like he was a threat. "Do you know we have a neighborhood watch? We report unfamiliar vehicles, especially ones like that." "What exactly do you mean by ones like that?" I asked. She ignored the question, pulled out her phone. Ethan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you calling the police?" he asked gently. "Yes, I am. Suspicious individual on the block. Possibly casing homes." "He's standing in front of mine," I said, voice raised. "You're making a mistake." But she'd already stepped away and started describing him to dispatch. Black male, late 20s, expensive car, standing near a house, refuses to identify himself. I could hear her voice shaking, not with fear, but with self-righteous energy, like she believed she was doing the neighborhood a service. Ethan looked down at the ground, then up at me. He didn't say a word, just stood there, calm, dignified. I felt sick. 5 minutes later, the sirens came. Lights flashing. One cruiser. Then two. Then three. Neighbors started stepping outside. Phones in hands. Recording. Watching. 2 officers got out, approached Ethan with caution. "Sir, we got a call about a potential trespasser. Can we see some ID?" Ethan didn't flinch. "Of course," he said, pulling it out. That's when I saw Karen standing on her lawn, arms crossed, lips pursed in some twisted version of satisfaction. And that's when one officer turned to her, looked down at the ID again, and his face changed. He glanced at his partner, whispered something. Then he walked over to Karen. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady. "Do you know who this man is?" Karen's eyes narrowed. "No. That's why I called." The officer exhaled. "This is the mayor's son." Her face went pale. She blinked. Once. Twice. "What?" "You called 911 on the mayor's son," he repeated. She looked around. People were still watching, recording, whispering. And then the third cruiser pulled up. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a clean blue blazer, silver hair, and a face you've seen on every billboard in this city. The mayor. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked at his son, looked at me, then looked at Karen. That silence was louder than anything he could have shouted. And I knew then this wasn't over. Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, the phone still clutched in her hand. The mayor didn't even glance at her. He walked straight toward his son, placing a firm hand on Ethan's shoulder. Ethan gave a small nod. There was no anger in his face, just quiet disappointment. The officers stepped back respectfully. One of them murmured something into his radio, and I caught the words of false report. I couldn't believe this was happening. The entire street had turned into a stage. Cameras recording from porches. Neighbors whispering, a few shaking their heads. One woman from 2 houses down folded her arms and muttered, "She's gone too far this time." Karen snapped out of her silence, trying to recover. "I didn't know." He didn't say who he was. The mayor turned slowly. He didn't have to, he said. You saw a young man you didn't recognize, and that was enough. Her face twisted. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. By calling the police on a visitor in front of his host's house, he wasn't doing anything. Just standing there. You called 911 because he was standing still? She looked like she wanted to argue, but the crowd around us had grown too thick. Her usual grip on the neighborhood was slipping. Everyone could feel it. I stepped forward. This isn't the first time she's done this. A kid delivering groceries last week. A lawn care guy 2 months ago. She always says they don't look like they belong. Karen turned to me, defensive. Why are you bringing that up now? Because people are watching, Karen. And they've been quiet too long. She looked around and realized it. Eyes were on her. Phones were still up. The mayor's gaze softened as he looked at me. Thank you for speaking up. What's your name? Ben. Well, Ben, this could have ended badly. I'm glad it didn't. He turned to the officers. Has he been cleared? Yes, sir, one officer said. We're wrapping it up. Karen interrupted, her voice shrill. You act like I committed a crime. The officer raised an eyebrow. False reports are taken seriously, especially when they lead to this kind of unnecessary escalation. One of the neighbors walked up. I've got it on video, everything she said. It's not the first time either. You want the footage? The officer nodded. Yes, please. Karen's composure cracked. You're siding with strangers over a resident? No, the officer replied. We're siding with the truth. Just then, another neighbor, Mr. Peterson, who'd lived here since the 80s, stepped forward. Karen, he said, voice calm, you've reported nearly a dozen people in the last year. You act like it's your personal neighborhood to police. But this street doesn't belong to you. Karen's voice broke. I was trying to help. The mayor finally spoke again, his voice low and level. If your idea of helping involves fear and profiling, then maybe it's time you stopped. That was the moment the air changed. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about everyone who'd been made to feel small, unwanted, and out of place. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. I'm not angry, ma'am, but I am tired. Tired of being treated like a threat before I even speak. Tired of people assuming the worst because of how I look. Karen's eyes were wet now, but she still looked angry, like the world had turned on her, like the mirror in front of her was too bright. One of the police cars pulled away. The other two lingered, speaking with neighbors. The mayor stood beside his son, quiet but resolute. The crowd slowly began to break apart. Some nodded at me as they passed. Others gave Ethan respectful glances. No one looked at Karen. Back inside my house, I sat down at the kitchen table, still shaking. Ethan poured himself a glass of water, then one for me. You okay? He asked. Are you? I said. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. This happens more than you think. It just usually doesn't make it this public. I'm sorry, I said. You don't have to be, he replied. But if people stay quiet, nothing changes. That stuck with me. And if you're watching this now, maybe it's time we stop being quiet. Maybe it's time we start holding people like Karen accountable. This isn't about drama. It's about dignity, respect, fairness, about calling out the subtle ways people try to control others to decide who belongs. If you've ever seen something like this happen, speak up. If you've ever been the one targeted, you're not alone. And if you believe in telling stories that matter, take a second to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe because this one isn't over. Outside, I saw the mayor speaking to someone quietly near his car. Ethan stood off to the side, staring down the street. Karen was still on her lawn, arms crossed, watching. But this time, she wasn't the one in control. And something told me she knew it. The next morning, I woke to an envelope taped to my front door. No stamp, no name, just a printed sheet inside, a formal complaint from the HOA, citing unregistered guests, inappropriate conduct, and neighborhood disruption. I laughed at first, thought it was some kind of mistake. But the signature at the bottom, Karen, and beneath that, 3 more names from the board. People I used to wave at on Sundays. People who stood silently yesterday. I showed it to Ethan, who was still in town. He read it carefully, then looked up at me. They're retaliating. For what? For embarrassing her. For standing up. She's the one who called the cops. Doesn't matter. Some people double down when they're exposed. Later that day, I was summoned to the HOA office, located in the same community hall where we host summer barbecues. The irony wasn't lost on me. I walked in and found Karen sitting behind the fold-out table, acting like a judge in a courtroom. Her usual smile was replaced with something colder. "We need to address the incident from yesterday," she said, sliding the complaint across the table. I didn't even sit. "You mean when you falsely reported my guest to the police?" "I followed protocol. Calling 911 is not protocol." She shifted in her seat. "He was aggressive." "You mean calm." "He made me feel unsafe." I stared at her. "Do you even hear yourself? We're here to discuss your behavior, not mine," she snapped. "You've allowed a non-resident to loiter. You created a public disturbance. And now you're stirring division in the neighborhood. You're the one who turned our street into a spectacle. And now you're trying to punish me for it." Her mouth tightened. "The board has reviewed your actions. If this continues, we'll consider fines. Even legal action." I stepped back. Because I had a friend visit, Karen didn't answer. She just slid another paper toward me. "Read it carefully." I didn't take it. I walked out. Outside, the sun felt too bright. I called Ethan. Told him everything. He was quiet for a second. "This isn't just about me," he finally said. "They're trying to scare you into silence. She wants me to disappear." "No," he said. "She wants to stay the most powerful voice on the block." We met that night with a few neighbors, people who'd watched everything happen and hadn't said much. Mr. Peterson came. So did the woman who'd filmed the police encounter. And a young couple who'd recently moved in. "She's filed complaints against 3 different families in the last 2 months, one of them said. And none of them look like her. I get nervous every time I have family over, another added. She always walks by slowly, staring. That's not just unfriendly, I said. That's targeted. We decided something had to be done. But not with shouting, not with anger. We'd use her own rules against her. Challenge the process. Document everything. The next day, I submitted an official response to the HOA complaint. I included photos, timestamps, even witness statements. Ethan offered a letter too formal, measured, powerful. And then something unexpected happened. The mayor showed up again. He came not in a suit, not in a limo, but in jeans and a fleece vest, just another neighbor dropping by. He asked to speak at the next HOA meeting. Karen tried to block him. "Only residents can speak," she protested. "My son was humiliated on your street," he said. "I think I've earned 5 minutes." The room was packed. Cameras this time, too. Local media had picked up the story. Karen opened the meeting stiffly, pretending nothing had happened. But when the mayor stood, everyone leaned forward. He didn't yell. He didn't shame. He told the story of his son, of growing up in neighborhoods where people judged each other silently, of the danger of weaponizing fear. He looked straight at Karen when he said it, and she looked away. Then he turned to the crowd. "You don't have to agree with everyone on your street, but you owe them respect. If your rules only protect people who look like you, they aren't rules, they're walls." He sat down. The room was quiet. Karen tried to change the subject, but it didn't work. The crowd didn't move. And for once, she looked small behind that folding table. Later, outside the hall, she passed me without saying a word. No threats, no comments. But her silence said everything. I realized then something had shifted. Maybe not for everyone, but enough. Enough to break the silence that had kept her in power. Enough to finally be heard. A week passed, and something unexpected began happening on our block. People were talking. Not whispering, really talking. For the first time in years, neighbors who used to avoid eye contact began knocking on doors, offering support, asking questions. Mr. Peterson invited Ethan and me to his backyard for coffee one morning. We found a small group already seated, 5 families from the neighborhood, most of whom had their own quiet stories. One man spoke first. "When we moved here 6 years ago, Karen filed a noise complaint the second day. Said our daughter's laughter was disruptive. Another added she told our babysitter she needed to register with the board, or she'd call the cops. My babysitter was 17. Each story hit the same nerve. Silence was the soil Karen had grown her authority in. Now, sunlight was pouring in, and her roots were showing. That same day, an anonymous letter appeared in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a typed message: "Be careful who you invite. Not everyone belongs here." It shook me, but not in the way the sender intended. Ethan read it, then folded it neatly. This is what fear looks like when it's losing. Passive, quiet, desperate. He was right, and it only made me more certain we had to keep going. We decided to hold a neighborhood open house. Nothing fancy, just a Saturday afternoon with tables of homemade food, music, and chairs on front lawns. No permits, no politics, just people. Together. I dropped flyers in mailboxes. Some came back shredded, but others, neighbors texted, offered to bring dishes. A woman named Clara, who'd never said more than hello, offered to make peach cobbler. That meant more than I could explain. Karen didn't attend, of course, but she watched, from behind her blinds, from across the lawn, silent. The day of the gathering, the street came alive. Kids played sidewalk chalk games. Someone strung string lights between two trees. I caught Ethan laughing with Mr. Peterson, helping him lift a speaker onto the porch. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. In the middle of it all, the mayor stopped by. This time with his wife. She brought a pasta salad. And when I introduced him to Clara, she said, "It's been a long time since this block felt like a community." Ethan caught my eye from across the street. He smiled. And it was genuine this time. Then, just as things were winding down, a squad car slowly rolled onto the block. Everyone froze. It was a reflex. But this time, the officer stepped out with a smile. "Just checking in," he said. "Heard there was something special happening on the street." Someone laughed. The tension broke. The officer waved and walked through, grabbing a soda and shaking hands. No reports. No warnings. Just presence. I glanced across the way and saw Karen still watching. The following Monday, a notice went out from the HOA. Community gatherings on front lawns will require prior board approval due to safety concerns. It was signed again by Karen. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The next weekend, 3 more neighbors hosted mini gatherings of their own. Coffee mornings, evening sing-alongs, front lawn yoga. Karen's notices kept coming, but fewer people listened. The board, once silent, began questioning her decisions. Mr. Peterson, longtime resident and once her quiet supporter, called for a review of complaint policies. Transparency. Accountability. The vote was scheduled for the end of the month. Meanwhile, Ethan prepared to leave. His break was ending, and he had to return to university. On his last night, we sat on my porch, watching the sun go down. "You changed this place," I told him. He shook his head. "You did." "No," I said. "You just reminded us how." He looked out at the street, quiet now, but still glowing with life from the weekend. "My dad always said leadership isn't loud. It's steady. And when it shows up, people feel it." I knew what he meant. Because for the first time, the street felt steady. That night, I walked him to his car. Karen was outside again, watering her roses. We passed her. She didn't speak. Neither did we. But I could feel her watching. This time not with power, but with unease. Because silence no longer protected her. Not here. And the truth? That was louder than ever. The final week of the month arrived, and with it came the vote, a meeting unlike any our neighborhood had ever seen. It wasn't just the usual handful of people this time. The community center was packed. Standing room only. Families, young couples, retirees, all gathered not just to listen, but to be heard. I sat near the back with Mr. Peterson and Clara. There was an electricity in the room, a sense that something long overdue was finally about to happen. Karen opened the meeting, as always, seated at the front with her clipboard and tight-lipped expression. But this time, her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Tonight's agenda includes proposed revisions to board oversight and community complaint protocols," she began, scanning the room. Please be respectful." Then she tried to move on quickly. But Mr. Peterson stood. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "Before we vote, I'd like to say something." Karen looked like she wanted to stop him, but the room had already shifted its attention. "I've lived here for 32 years, he began. "I've seen this place change, grow. But what happened on our street recently reminded me what community means and what it doesn't." He glanced back toward me. "It doesn't mean fear. It doesn't mean isolation. It doesn't mean one person deciding who's welcome." There were murmurs of agreement. "And I say this not to shame anyone," he added, turning toward Karen, "but to remind all of us why we moved here in the first place. Safety, belonging, peace." He sat down, and the silence afterward was powerful. Then the votes began. One by one, the board members read through each motion. New rules requiring transparency on complaints. Mandatory board reviews before any police calls tied to HOA concerns. A revised code of conduct to prevent targeted harassment. The biggest item, a motion to remove Karen as president. Karen stood to defend herself. She spoke of years of service, of maintaining order, of preventing chaos. But her words felt thinner now, like they'd lost their weight. People didn't interrupt her. They simply didn't agree. The vote was held. And when the hands raised, one by one, it was clear. Karen had lost. The meeting ended quietly. No applause. No gloating. Just a quiet, collective breath. A shift. As people left, some paused to thank Mr. Peterson. Others came up to me. One woman hugged me without saying anything. It was more than enough. Outside, the sky had turned a soft gray, dusk falling gently over the neighborhood. I walked home slowly. And as I reached my driveway, I saw Karen, standing at the edge of her lawn, alone. No clipboard. No posture of control. Just a woman, older, tired, staring at a world that no longer obeyed her silence. We didn't speak. I wasn't sure there was anything left to say. But in that stillness, I realized something. This story wasn't about revenge or payback. It wasn't even about one woman. It was about what happens when people stop looking away. When truth becomes louder than fear. When kindness stands up, not just to cruelty, but to control disguised as order. A few days later, Ethan called. He had just finished giving a presentation to a civic group at school. They wanted to know about leadership, he said. So I told him about Karen. I laughed. "You didn't." "I did, but not to make fun of her. To explain how power can be taken. And how it can be given back." He paused for a second, then added, "You'd be surprised how many people related to it. More than I expected." That's when it hit me, this story wasn't just ours. It belonged to every community where one voice tries to silence the rest. Every street where fear pretends to be authority. And maybe, just maybe, it would reach someone else too. So to those listening, if you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, or your neighbor held too much power, or the rules were used to keep you small, know this. You're not alone. In one moment of courage, it's all it takes to begin something bigger. If this story moved you, I invite you to like the video, subscribe for more true stories like this, and leave a comment sharing your experience. Because stories like these only grow stronger when we share them together. Thank you for watching. Months passed. The neighborhood wasn't perfect. No place ever is. But it was different now. Better. Lighter. The kind of place where people waved when they passed each other, where front lawns saw more laughter than silence. The HOA board rotated leadership. Mr. Peterson stepped in temporarily until a formal election. He focused on transparency and rebuilding trust, holding open meetings that encouraged community participation. Clara started a garden club. A few of us joined her on Saturdays, planting wildflowers near the park. She said it felt good to grow something instead of being afraid all the time. As for Karen, she withdrew. Quietly. Her blind stage shut more often than not. Some said she was embarrassed. Others thought she was bitter. I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't need to. But what no one expected, least of all me, was the letter. One morning in early spring, I found it taped to my front door. Handwritten. The envelope was creased, like someone had folded and unfolded it many times. Inside was a single page. "I owe you an apology," it began. I sat down before reading further. It was from Karen. She didn't offer excuses. She didn't try to justify anything. She simply wrote, "I was wrong. I let fear shape my decisions. I mistook control for order. And I hurt people." The final line read, "Thank you for showing me what leadership actually looks like." There was no signature, but I knew the handwriting. I knew it was real. I sat there for a long time, the morning sun warming my hands, the letter resting on my lap. Ethan was the first person I called. "You're kidding," he said. "No." And I think she meant it. "Maybe," he said. Or maybe the silence taught her more than words ever could. We didn't talk long. He was busy. Finals were coming up. But before we hung up, he said, "I think you helped change something bigger than a street." And I wondered, maybe he was right. A few weeks later, the neighborhood held its first official community day. No HOA restrictions, no gatekeeping. Just people celebrating the fact that they'd found their way back to one another. There were food trucks, games for the kids, local musicians. Even the mayor returned for an hour, shaking hands and offering thanks. What struck me most wasn't the size of the event, but the tone. There was no tension, no pretending, just ease, real connection. At one point, I looked across the park and saw Karen. She was standing alone, near the edge, a tote bag in her hand. She didn't approach anyone, but she was there. That was something. Clara walked over to her. They talked for a minute. Then they both laughed. It was soft, quick, but it was laughter. I don't know what was said. I didn't need to. Later, Clara told me she's trying. That's enough for now. And maybe that's the most any of us can hope for. Not perfection. Not a clean slate. Just the willingness to try again. To show up, even if we're not sure we'll be welcomed. The past doesn't disappear just because things change. But it can become something else, something we learn from instead of hide behind. That spring, Ethan came home for a short visit. He looked older somehow. Sharper, but softer too. We sat on the porch again, just like before, watching kids ride bikes up and down the block. He smiled. "Looks different now, doesn't it?" I nodded. "It feels like a neighborhood again. Funny what a little sunlight can do," he said. We didn't talk about Karen, or the vote, or the letter. We didn't need to. Instead, we talked about the future, about how communities like people are living things, fragile, resilient, and always capable of healing. Before he left, he turned and said, "You know, I think that block saved me a little too." And I realized something I hadn't fully seen before. This wasn't just a story about Karen, or Ethan, or even me. It was about all the quiet battles we fight in the places we call home. The way we choose kindness when control is easier. The way we speak up even when we're shaking. The way we hold space for change, even when it comes slowly. It's easy to underestimate the power of one voice. But when it speaks with truth, and when it refuses to sit down, it echoes. It reaches. It makes others brave. So if you're out there listening, maybe from your own porch, wondering if it's worth it to stand up to someone louder, someone with more rules than reasons, remember this. You don't have to do it alone. And your story matters. Because change always begins with one voice. And sometimes that's all it takes. Summer rolled in quietly, without ceremony. The kind of summer that slips in like an old friend, warm, familiar, and welcome. The changes in the neighborhood had taken root. Small gestures bloomed into daily routines. Mr. Peterson still walked his dog every morning, but now he stopped to chat with neighbors along the way. Clara's garden club had become a weekly event, and her sunflowers now towered along the entrance path to the park. One evening, just before dusk, we held a block dinner. Tables stretched down the entire street, potluck dishes laid out with handwritten labels, children running wild in between folding chairs. Music drifted softly from a Bluetooth speaker, and laughter, real, unguarded laughter, echoed off every porch. At some point during the evening, I saw Karen. She wasn't on the sidelines this time. She was seated at the very end of the row, beside an elderly couple I didn't recognize. She was quieter than most, but she was present. And when someone passed her a dish, she smiled. A soft, tentative smile, but it was real. I caught her glance across the table. She didn't look away. Instead, she gave me a nod. Not of friendship, not yet, but of something close, something like understanding. The moment passed, and the evening continued. But I held on to that small gesture. It reminded me of everything we'd been through, everything we'd survived. That night, after everyone had gone home, Ethan and I walked the empty street. The last traces of sunlight stretched long across the pavement. He looked up at the sky. When I left for school, I didn't think I'd miss this place. You don't have to miss it, I said. It'll always be here. And maybe it needed you to leave to find its footing. He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "You know, the mayor called me last week." My eyebrows raised. He wanted to thank me for staying calm, for setting an example. He said that day with Karen reminded him that even small moments can shift public trust. I smiled. "That's exactly what you did." He turned toward me. "No, that's what you did. You kept the story going when it would have been easier to walk away." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle gently. Before he flew back, Ethan left something on my kitchen table. It was a framed photo, one taken months ago at the community day event. It showed a group of us, me, Clara, Mr. Peterson, and others, standing beneath the park's welcome arch, smiling like we had finally exhaled after holding our breath for years. At the very edge of the photo, partially out of frame, was Karen. Not posing, not smiling, but present. A reminder, I think, that every story includes those we don't always understand. And that redemption isn't always loud. It can be quiet, slow, and deeply human. The neighborhood eventually voted in a new HOA board. More balanced, more diverse. People who actually listened. But I wasn't part of it. I didn't want a title. I had what I needed. Peace. A few weeks later, I was working in the front yard when a car pulled up. A woman stepped out, mid-60s, new to the area. She looked a little overwhelmed. "Hi," she said. "I just moved in. I was told you're the one to talk to if I have questions." I set my tools down and smiled. "Sure. Welcome." She glanced at the rows of houses. "It's a quiet street." "It didn't used to be," I said. "But we've worked hard to make it feel like home." She looked at me, then around again. "Well, I hope it stays that way." I didn't promise her it would. No one could. But I did tell her the truth. "If it ever stops feeling like home," I said, "you won't be the only one to notice." She smiled, and in that moment, I realized this was the real story. Not the drama, not the fallouts, but the way people show up for each other after the storm. That's what matters. And to anyone watching, if your neighborhood feels broken, if someone's voice has made you feel small, if you've been told that power always wins, don't believe it. Change doesn't come in loud declarations or angry confrontations. It comes in dinners shared, in apologies written, in voices that rise together instead of trying to rise above. You don't need to be the mayor's son to make a difference. You just need to stand up, once, with kindness, with conviction. And when you do, others will follow. Thank you for being part of this story. And if it spoke to you, if it reminded you of someone or something worth fighting for, please like the video, subscribe for more stories like this, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes healing starts with a single voice. And sometimes that voice is yours.